VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
Well, thank you, Mr. Morris, and good to have you with us on Crosstalk today. And we're going to be talking about something that is pretty serious stuff. We're talking about gun control. And as you are well aware, this is an issue before the general public. The issue of gun control, it's the kind of thing that's got the whole country talking. And what is happening in Washington, not legislation, but literally presidential decrees that seem to be shaping our policies and some big questions about the Second Amendment and where this thing is headed. Well, with us today is Lyndon Aiken. He is a federal firearms licensed dealer. He's a National Rifle Association firearms instructor since 1994 with the current certification in rifle, pistol, shotgun, and personal protection. He's a hunter education instructor and since 1996. He's also an attorney and his military experience with the U.S. Army and Virginia Army National Guard. And with that, we say, Mr. Aiken, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Vic. I appreciate it.
The Second Amendment says this: as a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to bear arms shall not be infringed. Can you explain this for us?
Well, in what context? And what does that mean? The Supreme Court is the one who interprets the constitutional amendments and what they mean, and the Supreme Court has said that means that every individual who's a responsible citizen has the right to bear arms for self-defense and for the common defense. And that there's a fairly recent case in 2008 called District of Columbia versus Heller, where Washington, D.C. banned all handguns, period. Nobody could have a handgun in Washington, D.C., even in their home. And that case went to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court said, yes, they can. The Second Amendment allows people to defend themselves, and handguns are a perfect self-defense weapon. And at least as far as Washington, D.C. was concerned, that law was unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court overturned it. So that's one case that's on point, and that case is, I'm looking at it, it is almost 60 pages long, and it lays out the history of the Second Amendment and the law related to it and how it developed from before the Revolution to 2008. And if anybody really wants to get into the details of the Second Amendment, I'd highly recommend that case, which can be found at 54 U.S. 570. That's the 554th volume of the U.S. Supreme Court Reports at page 570. It was decided in June of 2008. And it's titled District of Columbia versus Heller.
Now let's go a little further. The term tyrannical government was also in there somewhere, was it not?
That terminology has been used in some of the history, and of course, the history of the Second Amendment follows the recent overthrow of a tyrannical government in England. And of course, that was in the framers' mind and the people's mind when they passed the Second Amendment. It was to basically make sure that the ultimate power of the sword was in the people and not the government. And it also banned standing armies and quartering troops in homes and all kinds of things that the British had done that they wanted to make sure that no government could do again. And so that is an element of it, although that is not in the amendment itself. The amendment itself focuses on militia and the right to bear arms without explaining that right further. You have to look at history to pull that definition out. In another case called McDonald versus the City of Chicago, which is 2010, an even longer case with even more detail about the Second Amendment, decided that the federal rules that apply to Washington, D.C. also apply to all 50 states and their cities. Mm-hmm. And that was where Chicago was banning firearms, and the big legal issue was just because Washington, D.C. couldn't do it, why can't Chicago do it? Because Chicago is part of a state that's not under full-time federal control, and the Supreme Court said no, the 14th Amendment applies the Second Amendment to all the states. So every citizen of the United States has the right to keep and bear arms for self-defense.
Now, does this include a citizen's right to owning an AR-15 rifle?
Well, that's the question on the table right now. Mm-hmm. There's a case called U.S. versus Miller from 1939, and that case was about a short-barrel shotgun. The National Firearms Act of 1934 had required registration of machine guns, short-barrel shotguns, and short-barrel rifles for them to be legally possessed. And these gentlemen had a shotgun that was not registered, so they were arrested and charged with a crime. And the defense was that the Second Amendment protected their right to have a sawed-off shotgun, mm-hmm. and they lost. The U.S. Supreme Court said that they saw no reason to believe that a sawed-off shotgun was necessary to the common defense, and they talked quite a bit about weapons that are common in military use and that would be appropriate for militia to own. And that's not something they spelled out completely, they basically said that the weapons that should be owned by the people for common defense should be of a type similar to ordinary military equipment, mm-hmm. and its use could contribute to common defense. And it's and they talk about it being the sort of weapon that is typical of the time, so that would change over time.
Well, it goes from a musket with a musket ball and powder.
Right, it went from a flintlock to a cap lock to a single shot to a lever action or a bolt action to a semi-automatic and arguably an automatic M16, but nobody's made that argument. And the AR-15 is the civilian version of the standard military rifle. So there's certainly a good argument to be made that it is precisely what the Second Amendment is talking about, mm-hmm. that we are all supposed to, or at least have the right to, bear an arm that has military use in the case of the need for common defense, separate from our right to self-defense, which can include pistols and possibly other types of guns.
Now, you know the discussion about guns with shorter barrels, mm-hmm. And I'm going way, way back in my family tree, where Dad was kind of a special handyman, do-it-all, whatever. And I remember a neighbor had a .30-30 carbine with a long hex barrel. Mm-hmm. And as he'd go deer hunting during the deer season, this long barrel was always a mess when you're going through the brush. And so he called Dad. He said, "Can you shorten this thing up for me, make it more convenient?" Well, Dad, in not even realizing, and this is way back in the 40s and 50s, mm-hmm. I remember Dad taking the hacksaw and cutting the about 6 inches off the end of the barrel and reinstalling a sight, mm-hmm. and putting this thing together. And the man was happy, and no longer did he worry about the end of this long barrel getting entangled in the trees as he was hunting deer. Well, many years later, a guy named Randy Weaver mm-hmm. apparently shortened the barrel on a gun and ended up with the feds on his case.
Well, there's a federal law called the National Firearms Act, passed in 1934, that requires shotguns and rifles with barrel length shorter than a certain amount mm-hmm. To be registered with the ATF, and that's 18 inches for a shotgun and 16 inches for a rifle. Mm-hmm. So if you shorten it below that without properly registering it, then you've committed a felony.
Well, Dad didn't take that much off. It was just on 6 inches, and this is a long barrel.
He probably didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
But if it's below 60, I mean, it's very, I mean, it can't even be a 32nd of an inch shorter than 16 inches without being contraband and felony to possess it.
Well, ultimately, in the Randy Weaver case, a life was lost. A child was killed.
Oh, yeah, I recall it well.
I'll never forget that ATF thing. Well, let's go into this Second Amendment thing and what's happening in Washington today. I happen to have queued up here the comments by our president. It runs about 3 minutes, and let's see. I don't think we'll run out of time. I hope not.
Okay.
In fact, no. I'll tell you what. We'll pick it up on the next quarter hour. But let's talk a little bit about your perception of what you've already heard this thing, what he said. What do you interpret his statements to mean?
Well, he's going to issue some executive orders to the ATF and possibly other departments in the government to do things related to firearms. And I don't know what those are going to be.
But there's about 19 of them.
Well, there are 19 recommendations coming from the Biden committee. Some of those recommendations are legislative. Mm-hmm. In other words, that President Obama should push certain legislation to be passed. Others are to make executive orders, and I don't know which will be which. There are a lot of things that the president doesn't have the authority to do with executive order without congressional legislation of some sort underlying it, but he could certainly give orders to the ATF to enforce things more carefully or strictly or thoroughly than they do now.
The Congressman Steve Stockman of Texas said yesterday afternoon that he would file articles of impeachment against the president if he institutes gun control measures with an executive order. Now, is there merit to what this congressman's saying?
Depends on the measure. The Constitution provides for impeachment, and there's a procedure for that. And I'm going to flip to that because I have my personal copy of the Constitution right here. And if the president acts wrongly enough, then Congress can file articles of impeachment. And, of course, it has to be voted upon. And you may recall that they voted for impeachment of Clinton in the House, but the Senate's the one to remove the president once they're impeached, and they didn't do it.
A lot of people don't understand that impeachment is not the exiting of a president yet.
The enforcement of the impeachment takes both houses, not just the
And the
House.
Impeachment process is an examination of the fact.
Right.
And then after the determination, the vote occurs, and if, as you have well said, if the Congress and the Senate agree, then they're out.
And, that's a little unlikely over a gun control issue that may be arguable both ways as to whether it's constitutional or not.
Well, even Ed Meese, the former United States Attorney General, said the president could easily be impeached if he bypassed Congress and enacted gun control legislation by executive order. We're going to be back in 60 seconds with our guest, London Aiken. He is a federal arms licensed dealer and a lot of other things there, which gives good authority to what he's saying today. We'll be right back.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, how can an insect walk on water?
Chris, tiny insects are able to walk on water due to a feature called surface tension. The laws of physics cause there to be an attraction of the water molecules to one another on the surface, which is strong enough to support the weight of a tiny insect, but of course it's broken by heavier objects. This surface tension is very important for all of life. It's related to the capillary action which pulls water up from the ground into the higher branches of the trees. Without it, the plant would die, and all things that depend on the plants would die. Chris, don't you see, God is a very wise planner. He put it all together so that it works and supports life. He did it all back in Genesis.
Thanks, Dr. Morris. If you'd like to go back to Genesis, visit us on the web at www.icr.org. That's www.icr.org.
And welcome back to Crosstalk, as today we're talking about gun control, the Second Amendment under fire. Our guest is Lyndon Aiken. He is a federal firearms licensed dealer. He's a National Rifle Association firearms instructor since 1994 with current certification in rifle, pistol, shotgun, and personal protection. And he's a hunter education instructor since 1996. He is also an attorney. He has military experience with the U.S. Army and Virginia Army National Guard. So well-informed and an asset to us today as we're talking about this issue. Before we get back to Lyndon, we are going to listen to Mr. Obama and his comments, about 3 minutes and 49 seconds, dealing with what he wants to do, and whether it's by congressional order or whether it's by presidential executive order. We're going to listen and see what he has to say as we go now to that important soundbite.
On the issue of guns, given how difficult it will be, some would say impossible, to get any gun control measure passed through this Congress, what are you willing or able to do using the powers of your presidency to act without Congress? And I'd also like to know, what do you make of these long lines we're seeing at gun shows and gun stores all around the country? I mean, even in Connecticut, applications for guns are up since the shooting in Newtown.
Well, my understanding is the Vice President's going to provide a range of steps that we can take to reduce gun violence. Some of them will require legislation. Some of them I can accomplish through executive action. And so I'll be reviewing those today, and as I said, I'll speak in more detail to what we're going to go ahead and propose later in the week. But I'm confident that there are some steps that we can take that don't require legislation and that are within my authority as president. And where you get a step that has the opportunity to reduce the possibility of gun violence, then I want to go ahead and take it.
Can you give me an idea of what kind of...
Well, I think, for example, how we are gathering data, for example, on guns that fall into the hands of criminals, and how we track that more effectively. There may be some steps that we can take administratively as opposed through legislation. As far as people lining up and purchasing more guns, I think that we've seen for some time now that those who oppose any common sense gun control or gun safety measures have a pretty effective way of ginning up fear on the part of gun owners that somehow the federal government's about to take all your guns away. And that there's probably an economic element to that. It obviously is good for business, but I think that those of us who look at this problem have repeatedly said that responsible gun owners, people who have a gun for protection, for hunting, for sportsmanship, they don't have anything to worry about. The issue here is not whether or not we believe in the Second Amendment. The issue is, are there some sensible steps that we can take to make sure that somebody like the individual in Newtown can't walk into a school and gun down a bunch of children in a shockingly rapid fashion. And surely we can do something about that. But part of the challenge that we confront is that even the slightest hint of some sensible, responsible legislation in this area fans this notion that somehow here it comes and that everybody's guns are going to be taken away. It's unfortunate, but that's the case. And if you look at over the first 4 years of my administration, we've tried to tighten up and enforce some of the laws that were already on the books. But it'd be pretty hard to argue that somehow gun owners have had their rights infringed.
Yes, gonna We're going to tighten up on this type of thing. What is done in the First Amendment, yes, we've tightened up on it. We've had Fast and Furious, where thousands of guns were released into the hands of criminals. And as I listened to that, my reaction, as the president speaking about having a good source of data about guns that fall into the hands of criminals. Well, since when are criminals registering their guns so that there's a source of data? This blows me away, Lyndon.
Well, you mentioned registering and data. I think there's going to be a push to register semi-automatic rifles that are considered assault weapons.
But what criminal is going to register his?
Well, none. And of course, but that's the teeth in the Dianne Feinstein bill that is summarized already, and that was done about 3 weeks ago. She put their summary out of what she's planning to introduce next week in the Senate. And it requires registration under the National Firearms Act of a lot of semi-automatic rifles and shotguns and pistols as if they were machine guns. And I think that's what they're talking about having the data and keeping track, is they want it to be the same as the NFA registry of Class 3 items.
Well, in his statement, this is what I caught there. He wanted the data on guns that fall into the hands of criminals. And how in the world is he going to get that unless he gets it after the crime?
I don't know of any other way.
Right.
Of course, that's not freely volunteered data, that's for sure, not by the criminal. But that act that's going through the Senate is going to have his full support, and that's where the registration comes in. And that's where guns become contraband and can be confiscated if they're not registered, if that goes into effect. Machine guns are in that status now. And there are many registered machine guns in the country that are legally transferable if properly registered.
Now, the president claims that he has the constitutional authority to take executive action on gun control. And, of course, that was that question we touched on earlier. Steve Stockman of Texas claiming he'd file impeachment articles against the president if he institutes gun control measures with an executive order. Now, he didn't say that if it was through legislation, but an executive order. Ed Meese, the same way.
Well, the impeachment section says the president shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Mm-hmm. And the oath of office of the president says that I will faithfully execute the office of president, etc., to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
There you go.
So I suppose if you can clearly show that the president is failing to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, that failure is either treason or a high crime or misdemeanor, and that theoretically, therefore, he could be impeached. Now, the executive orders are not going to be that clearly in violation of the Second Amendment, I don't think. There will be an argument that it does, but unfortunately I'm talking like a lawyer because I am one. There's always an argument on almost every issue on both sides, and that's what judges are for, to decide who's right in the argument. And as long as it's arguable, I think the executive order can be issued even though it may not be correct.
Now, there's been mixed reports coming out about Walmart. And the first story came out saying they were going to suspend ammunition sales, and then Walmart said this is not true. Do you have any any information on this?
I do not know. I know that ammunition has sold out nearly everywhere, at least in my part of the country. There's all the shelves are pretty much empty for most all common types of ammunition. Even 22 rimfire target loads are all gone.
Oh, wow.
And I think it's people are worried about coming restrictions and trying to be grandfathered, which this Feinstein bill does. It provides for grandfathering in some circumstances, which explains the buying of guns all over the place of semi-automatic rifles and pistols, because if you're going to ever own one, and this law passes, you better own it when the law passes, because you'll be able to register it and keep it, where after the law passes, there will probably be no more sold, if it passes. Now, passing is going to be tough because the House of Representatives is relatively pro-gun and relatively solid on the Constitution. So I will be surprised if that bill becomes law, but there's going to be an effort.
Right now we're going to open our phone lines because I'd like you to be able to call in and talk with our guest today. That's Lyndon Aiken, E-A-K-I-N. And we've shared his bio with you. I want to hear from you gun owners out there. Find out what you think about this and what your response to it is as you anticipate some of these executive orders coming out of Washington. How do you respond to it? What's your opinion? There are some people that say, I'm going to react to it. Or how do you react to it? Our telephone number is 800-733-9829, 800-733-9829. And lines are almost jammed at this moment. Keep your calls coming in. And if you find a busy signal, as soon as we terminate with one call and take the next caller, that line will be open for you to call. So use your speed dialer if you would, and we'll be happy to take your call. And have you any literature or sources of information, Lyndon, that you can share with our listeners?
Well, I wish I did. I've been contemplating a book of some sort about this, and I haven't written it yet. I have these cases, which I've already cited to you. I didn't give you all the citations that allow people to look them up.
Do you have a website?
I do, class3only.com.
Class3only.com.
Yeah, and Class 3 is machine guns and short-barrel rifles and short-barrel shotguns, which I don't deal with anything but machine guns. But you can legally buy and sell and transfer machine guns right now if you register them properly with the ATF in most states, but not all states. And that's what I think is the effort that's coming for semi-automatic rifles to have that same status. You have to register it with the ATF to own it. And, of course, some people want all guns to be in that status.
So my Smith & Wesson 9mm with 10 shells in the clip is going to have to be registered?
I think they're talking about more than 10 at this point. 10, something that can take a magazine that holds more than 10. Is what I think, but the definition has not been published yet. But I think that's the case. That's the old quote-unquote assault weapon ban was more than 10. You could have a 10 round, but not like you couldn't have a Glock with 13 or 15 rounds. You have to register that. Or even a Beretta or a 9mm high power, I guess, from the 1930s and 40s would take 13 rounds. I assume all of those guns would fall into the category of quote-unquote assault weapons.
We're going to be right back, folks. This is Crosstalk on VCY America. 95 stations with us today, coast to coast. I'm sure you have questions. You're welcome to call 800-733-9829. Right now, Black River Falls, Wisconsin on the air, Pensacola, Florida, caller from Alabama. Get on the phone, give us a call. We'll be right back.
The Bible tells us that no man knows the day or the hour of Christ's return, but we are told to be ready, to look for that blessed hope, and to occupy until he comes. The Bible characterizes what the last times would be like, and observing world conditions today, we know the Lord could return at any time. When Jesus' disciples asked, "What will be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" Jesus carefully explained what the world would be like. In the book, 40 Irrefutable Signs of the Last Generation, author Noah Hutchings takes a thought-provoking look at these signs of the last generation and the importance of being ready for the Lord's return. This book is the size of a workbook and features over 200 pages presenting 40 irrefutable signs of the last generation. One copy of this book is available for a donation of $20, and 2 copies are available for a donation of $35. To make your donation to VCY America, call 1-800-729-9829. That's 1-800-729-9829.
And welcome back to Crosstalk. Vic Eliason, your host today, and along with us is Lyndon Aiken. He's a federal firearms licensed dealer. He is a National Rifle Association firearms instructor since 1994, with current certification in rifle, pistol, shotgun, and personal protection. He's a hunter education instructor. He's also an attorney, has military experience with the U.S. Army and the Virginia Army National Guard. And so you've got an expert on the line today. And so we're going to go right now to our phones and talk with Jenny in Alabama. And Jenny, you're on the air with Lyndon Aiken.
Just a comment. Your guest is very well-spoken, and I do not own a gun, but I am not in favor of this legislation because, frankly, I don't think you can legislate evil. The mother of the boy that started all this or has brought it to a head, she did everything right. She had the guns. They used it. My understanding was that was one of the ways that she communicated with him, be it right or wrong, indifferent. I don't have an opinion on that, but what I do have an opinion on is our Constitution, and it guarantees those who want to bear arms, they do it properly, and I don't see anything wrong with that. You can't legislate what's in a person's mind. That boy snapped. You can't put, and I'm not a lawyer, but let's just get down to basics. Nobody knew that was coming, not even his own mother. He killed her first. I mean, I don't understand what people are trying to do here. And this just gives the president, I didn't vote for him the first time, I didn't vote for him the second time, but he thinks that he can use executive power or order every time he chooses on a situation. That's not right.
You have a question for our guest. Do you have a question for our guest? Okay, Jenny is gone. She has had her moment to speak, and we appreciate that. One of the things she said that the mother did not know, I think there was some knowledge of bizarre behavior involved in that because she was contemplating some care or mental health or something that he discovered. But maybe I'm a little radical, Lyndon, but I firmly believe also that there are some influences in the minds of kids that dehumanizes killing, and it's called video games. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm not familiar with those video games. I don't play them, haven't seen them.
The military used them. One was called Halo, used with the Xbox, and there's a lot of shooting.
Yeah, my military experience predates those games.
Okay.
I left in 1990, right before the first Gulf War, and we had simulations that were probably the predecessor. And, of course, there's television and movies and all kinds of videos that have endless violence in them. There's no question about that. I don't know what effect that has on people.
Let's go to Hamilton in Pensacola, Florida. And, Hamilton, you're on the air. Go ahead. Hamilton, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Oh, yes. Hi. I have a question, and it's probably rhetorical, but Feinstein says that she wants to have everybody register their weapons and stuff like that, and Obama says he wants to pass executive order. Now, my thing is, Feinstein willing to register everybody that drinks, and is Obama willing to pass executive order for all the people that kill people during drunk driving every year? I mean, either way you put it, if you really want to, add numbers up when it comes to deaths, the drunk driving situation in America surpasses a lot more.
Well, that constitutional amendment called Prohibition was already tried and repealed, so I don't think there's any constitutional authority there. Of course, we're talking about, you're right, it's a rhetorical question. Of course not. They're going to focus on the guns, although I think there is going to be a movement to register people who have mental illness.
Right.
And put them in the database for background checks.
Right, which is totally understandable. But for them to say they want to register everybody that has a gun, they need to understand that would be like registering everybody that drinks.
Yeah.
It's like, some people drink, they know how to handle it. Some people can't, they get help. Some people buy guns, they can handle it, and some people that are sick cannot have guns whatsoever. That's the way it should be looked at, not just that everybody should have to pay for somebody else's mistakes.
But guys, here's a situation in the case of this young man who came and killed. Registering guns would not have helped him. I mean, he took his mother's guns, and he had no right to them, but he got them. And here you got somebody with a sick. It was a human being that did the killing, not the guns.
Right, and also another thing they didn't mention was about a year ago, there was an incident in a school in Wyoming where a kid went and killed his stepmom with a knife. Went to the school with a crossbow, killed his father, and then killed himself with the knife. That was never talked about, so what do we do now? Get rid of the knives and the crossbows?
Hamilton, thanks for your call from Pensacola. Appreciate that very much. Sharing your thoughts today across the phone lines here. Let's go to Black River Falls, Wisconsin, and talk with Tony. Tony, you're on the air. Our phone number, 800-733-9829. Tony.
Hey, Vic, how you doing? I just wanted to say thank you for your program. I listen to it daily. It's probably the best source of news and information I've had in a long time. One of the things I wanted to bring up, and a question for the guest speaker is, they did this once already in Australia. They had everyone register their guns, and after they registered them, they decided that, well, we don't think you should have those guns, so these are the guns you guys are going to turn in. They called it a government buyback. And since then, people might not realize it, but their crime has increased over 60% since the day that happened. Do people not realize that, things like this could happen? They want you to register guns, and then they can decide at any time, well, we know what you have now. We're going to take them from you.
Well,
I guess, that is a possible ultimate result of registration if it were all guns. Now, they're not proposing registration of all guns at this point. They're proposing registration, or Feinstein is proposing registration of semi-automatics that hold more than 10 rounds, which is about 10% of guns in this country.
But once you get this camel into the tent, it doesn't take much to change the size of the clip, does it?
No. I mean, the system's in place with the National Firearms Act registry for machine guns, although that registry is in the hundreds of thousands, maybe close to 1 million with short barrel rifles and shotguns. And we're talking about adding 15 or 20 million guns at least to that registry, which is a monumental project. We're talking potentially thousands of federal employees to process that.
Thank you, Tony. From Black River Falls, we're going to move along to Port Huron, Michigan, and talking with Harry. Harry, you're on the air.
Hi, guys. First of all, I want to say, Lyndon, thank you for your service to our country. Sure appreciate it, because I cannot, so I appreciate what you're doing.
You're welcome.
And I do support the Second Amendment, people having the right to bear arms. But here's my thing. At the same time, I do agree with the background check idea, and I also agree with the mental illness screening idea. Now, I am on an antidepressant. I have quite a temper. And if I wanted to, which I don't want to, but if I wanted to, I could find a gun here in this town and I could buy it from somebody. I would hate to think, So that's my thing. I think I don't want to take guns away from people, but I don't want to see people have them that shouldn't, because they're really sick people.
My question, though, gentlemen, is this: how do you link mental illness or mental, questionable emotional character with the gun? How do you link the two together?
I think personally, what do you think about this, Linda? I'd like to hear. I think personally, if somebody has a history, if they have a mental history, counseling, different kinds of issues, depression, I think, is a big one. I think issues with anger, issues with rage, those kind of things. If they have issues, that's where I'm coming from. I think we can't let this happen and just continue to happen and go unchecked.
Well, I think what you're going to see is a law passed that if someone in your town sold you a gun, they would be violating the law.
Yeah.
Because I think we're going to see background checks required for all sales.
Sure.
And I think we're going to see that if you've been treated for mental illness, that you're not going to qualify for a sale.
Correct.
And there may be some mechanism to appeal that and have a judge decide whether or not that can be waived. I don't know. And that whole concept is fairly acceptable to nearly everyone, that someone who potentially is violent and has some history that shows that needs to be in the background database, and then all guns need to go through that database when they're sold. Now, it won't stop black market sales, but it will stop easy sales from parking lot of the gun show, or even the aisles of the gun show, or the newspaper, or the swap meet, or whatever. People who don't want to violate the law won't sell that way. And let me mention that I have 2 elementary school children myself.
All right, let's go to Salina, Kansas, and we're going to talk to Dale. Our phone number, 800-733-9829. Dale, you're on the air. Your thought?
Yes. Your topic today is very interesting, and I'm kind of want to ask you a question because the man is a lawyer as well. Mm-hmm. On impeachment, if this business over the president doing executive orders, if he's impeached, can he be impeached for other crimes and misdemeanors other than the one of misuse of his office through executive order?
Sure. Any bribery, treason, or high crime or misdemeanor, whatever that means. Usually that's some major thing. Well, with Richard Nixon, it was for lying. He was impeached for basically not telling the truth about the Watergate situation and removed from office.
What I was thinking of was the impeachment bill wouldn't be limited to just one thing. In the case of this senator that wants to impeach him over the illegal use of his office?
Well, if that is indeed provable that there's illegal use of the office, then that's certainly something that can be brought up.
Appreciate that, Dale, from Salina, Kansas. We're going to go right now to Bayview, Wisconsin, talk to Mike. And Mike, you're on the air. Hello, Mike. Hello, Mike. Okay, Mike, sorry about that, but you got to stay on the phone if you're going to talk with us on the air. Let's go to Marianne in Sarasota, Florida. And Marianne, you're on the air.
Question. I wanted to know if a person already owned a small handgun with 6 rounds, and if they were broken into, and if the gun was registered, would they be held breaking the law?
I'm sorry, I don't think I understood that question.
Registered?
Well, if you hold right there, Marianne, we'll pick it up right after the break, okay? Don't go away. Okay. Stay right on the line, and we'll talk about it. This is Crosstalk. We're talking about gun ownership. We're talking about Second Amendment. We're talking about possible impeachment because of executive orders being used in areas that raise the question. We shall return in a minute. This is Crosstalk.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brennan House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. Many Christians here in America are wringing their hands over our presidential elections of 2012. But let me make it very clear. Election results do not change the fact that God is still in control. Our mission has not changed. We're to continue to preach the gospel and disciple fellow believers. Our mission on the day before the election was the Great Commission, and today it is still the Great Commission. If your life is largely committed to the culture war, then you will feel defeated by the re-election of President Obama. And well, you should, because your life is not going to have an eternal impact, and your focus is also not a good sign of your spiritual condition. However, if your life is committed to the defense and proclamation of the gospel and biblical discipleship, then you realize that our success is not defined by earthly elections, which have nothing to do with God's ultimate plan. Our main focus should be preaching the gospel to the lost, defending the gospel, and protecting the church from false teachers. And I hope that's your continued commitment, even in 2013.
And one of the fastest moving hours, or I should say 53 minutes in radio, is Crosstalk, because we move right along with your calls, your questions, and I'm sure many of you would like. And we lost Mary Ann somewhere in the process. She dropped off the line, and we're very sorry about that. Elizabeth in Wisconsin. Elizabeth, you are on the air. Go ahead. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hello. I'll take you off speaker. I'm in the mental health field.
Hello.
Oh, no.
Well, hello. Okay. We have people apparently pushing the buttons, and we did not cut them off. But, Elizabeth, apparently you're on a speakerphone and must have hit the wrong button. Let's go to Dan in Grafton, Wisconsin. Dan, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi. I'm a gun owner. I've got a couple of handguns and an over-under shotgun. And what I'm curious about is Canada is right next door to us. Big hunting country, a frontier country, same media, same video games and movies. Yet their murder rate and their homicide rate with firearms is much, much less than the United States. And I'm wondering why your guest thinks that is.
I don't know that I have an answer to that. If I can guess that they don't have the concentration of crime and people in large cities that we do. A whole lot of the violence that make up our statistics occurs in the large cities in the country with gangs and criminal element that you don't see in Canada.
Well, let me add to that question, and Dan, stay there with you. What about this business in Texas where concealed carry was approved and a radical drop in crime all of a sudden happened? Don't you think there's some contribution there?
I just struggle with what the Canadians are doing better than we are doing. I've got some relatives who live in Great Britain. They sent me an email and they said, you know what? In our entire country last year, we had 55 homicides for the entire year for firearms, and the United States was 12,000. And I don't understand why other English-speaking countries seem to be so much better at treating the mentally ill or doing something better than what we're doing.
Well, Robert, if you can squeak a call in from the United Kingdom, we'll try to cover that as well. Good question. Thanks, Dan, for asking it. We have a listener in England who's listening even right now, usually. We'll wait and see if he calls. But right now, Beverly in Whitewater, Wisconsin. And Beverly, you're on the air.
Yes, I have three of them. One is we're following in the path of Germany exactly. Register your guns, and so when the time comes, they know right where to get the guns. Another one is our forest fathers came over here, and the purpose was to have guns in case of a tyrannical government, which they left. And another one is Switzerland requires every home to have firearms for protecting their home, and they don't have crime. And I could give quite a few others.
Beverly, thank you. Thank you for sharing that from Whitewater. We're coming down the home stretch here with a few moments, and I'm going to reserve a minute or so for myself because I remember Darrell Scott's address to Congress. And, folks, I think there's an element to remember that the decreasing moral strength and character of our culture as we have become so self-sufficient and so loaded with toys and greed and anger and emotional out of control. And we've thrown out God because, after all, he represents right and wrong. And who wants right and wrong to cramp our style? And we live in a world where the best way, we had it way back in the early days in the Bible. The first two sons, Cain killed Abel. And as Darrell Scott put it, he said it was not the club, or it was the club didn't rise up and kill Abel. That was in the hands of Cain. And he says they didn't start the NCA, the National Club Association. But folks, remember, it's not the gun that kills people, it's people. Your thoughts, we've got just about 2 minutes left. And London, I'm going to give you those minutes.
Well, I appreciate that. I think we're going to see what Joe Biden recommends shortly. I think he's meeting with the president right now. And this afternoon we should hear those recommendations. Then we'll have something a little more concrete. Then we'll have President Obama's discussion of what he plans to do by the end of the week. We will have at least one bill introduced into the Senate next week for argument and evidence and discussion in the Senate. And whatever comes out of the Senate will then go to the House of Representatives, to the Judiciary Committee, where it will be studied and argued and discussed. And if it gets out of committee, then argued and discussed on the House floor for a final vote.
Well, Lyndon, I want to thank you for being with us and sharing those thoughts. You are observing this as an attorney. But may I say this, ladies and gentlemen, there is a point of action each of you can take, and that is to pick up your phone and talk to your legislators. And that telephone number is free. Well, not really. It probably cost you $0.25 to dial it. But that phone number is 202-224-3121 or 202-225-3121. And if you have some feelings on gun control, whatever they may be, I would urge you to call your congressmen and your senators and let them know what America thinks and where you stand. Because some of these guys are going to be making decisions based on, well, whichever the way the political wind is blowing, or just rationalizing certain issues without dealing with the moral issues. And if it's just a matter of some mechanical devices called guns, or are we talking about the people that are the users of guns and what is in the dark crevices of their hearts? I would suggest that this would be an important thing to get in touch with your congressman, and also might be a good thing to pray for your country. Again, our thanks, Lyndon Aiken from the Federal Arms. He's a Federal Arms dealer. He's the National Rifle Association, and we thank you so much, Lyndon, for being with us. Thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk.
Listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.